Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Alright, those are times long gone, so let's not talk about them anymore. Let's go. Let me see what other unique and magical qualities your spiritual power possesses. Speaking of which, the body sect is also adept with using spiritual power, but there's quite a gap when compared to you. Your spiritual power alone has the standard of a title Doluor, so you are absolutely worthy of participating in this operation with us. Dubuzi's cultivation and vision were incredible. Even though he only felt Huo Yuhao's spiritual power for a brief moment, he could immediately make an accurate judgment. Alright, let me lead the way. Huo Yuhao pulled Tang Wutong as he spoke, and they rose into the air at the same time. They didn't release their martial souls, they were just using soul power to channel the flying-type soul tool behind their backs. Wings stretched out behind them as they gradually hovered in mid-air. The other 15 titled Doluor rose into the air one after another, but they experienced another strange scene as they flew into the sky. They realized to their surprise that, with spiritual detection, Huo Yuhao actually presented a flight course in their minds, and everyone's flight course was different. These titled Doluor flew according to the charted flight course, and immediately formed a circular formation in the sky as they enveloped Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong in the center. Great multitasking, Dubuzi praised once more. He didn't hide his admiration for Huo Yuhao at all. Huo Yuhao nodded in his direction before he channeled his spiritual power once more, and passed precise forward paths to the titled Doluor. Everyone flew up at the same time, and they proceeded in the direction of the Sun-Moon Empires under Huo Yuhao's command. The air contorted faintly just as they surged into the sky, and all 17 people disappeared into the air just like that. Everyone was surprised yet again. The other titled Doluor felt a flash in front of their eyes, before everyone else disappeared around them. But strangely, through Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection, they could feel everyone's precise locations in their minds. This also meant that what they could see with spiritual detection was vastly different from what they could see with their eyes. This is mass concealment. Dubuzi attempted to use his spiritual power to sense the people around him, but the body Doluor was truly astonished this time. The reason was because he realized that, even with his spiritual power, he had to unleash his spiritual power to the highest possible level if he wanted to sense the others' locations. Afterwards, he still had to judge according to the exact locations that Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection provided before he could make out the details, and only then could he feel some faint spiritual undulations. As for everyone else, which included the heavenly sun Doluor, they couldn't feel anything at all. They felt like everyone had just vanished into thin air. The heavenly sun Doluor no longer underestimated Huo Yuhao at all. What he had accomplished right now was far more important and effective than any of the titled Doluor were in this operation. With an ability that could conceal everyone from sight, they could reach the Sun-Moon Empire without expending too much effort. Furthermore, once they completed their task, retreating would also be a lot easier. They would have a better guarantee of their safety. The White Tiger Duke was the one who had suggested that Shrek Academy send Huo Yuhao on this operation, because he had the best understanding of his mighty reconnaissance, investigation, and concealment abilities. The titled Doluor were all full of praise for the White Tiger Duke's decision in this moment. They no longer underestimated Huo Yuhao, were instead full of curiosity. Their speed began to gradually increase under Huo Yuhao's control, and they began to rise high into the sky. Everyone could feel that Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection was stretching far into the distance. Nobody felt much in the beginning, but their expressions began to change when it reached more than 3,000 meters into the distance. Before this, they had some doubts when the body Doluor had remarked that Huo Yuhao's spiritual power had reached a titled Doluor's standard, and they had thought Dubuzi was exaggerating things. But now they began to understand that Dubuzi wasn't exaggerating at all. How could anyone sustain spiritual detection over such a large area without possessing strength of a titled Doluor's spiritual power? 3,000 meters was just the beginning. Afterwards, Huo Yuhao reached 4,000 meters, then 5,000, then 6,000. When Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection stretched all the way to 10,000 meters, the body Doluo couldn't help but blurt out, "Kid, your spiritual power has the standard of a transcendent Doluo." Huo Yuhao smiled faintly and replied, "You flatter me, sir. I'm just cutting some corners with my soul skill." Du Buzi chortled, but said nothing more. It was a soul skill, but it was 100,000-year soul skill. The higher Huo Yuhao's cultivation was, the more he could feel and experience exactly how powerful the 100,000-year soul skill that his brother Sky Dream had bestowed upon him all those years ago was. Those 400,000-year soul skills consolidated his spirit eye's foundations. Huo Yuhao was very modest, but nobody dared to underestimate him anymore. Titled Doluo could reach accurate conclusions from just a single glimpse, and even though they didn't know how formidable his fighting strength was, they could be sure that this youngster's potential in the future was boundless. Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection, which could reach an incredibly far distance, quickly began to have practical uses. Large masses of all kinds of surveillance soul tools had already appeared in his vision, and the titled Doluo could sense them all through spiritual detection. These surveillance soul tools covered between 3,000 and 5,000 meters of airspace, and it was an all-round detection with all kinds of surveillance soul tools. They covered almost all the space below 5,000 meters. The effect of Huo Yuhao taking the titled Doluo further up was presented in this moment. They had no choice but to keep flying up, because unless they were higher in the sky, they couldn't pass by all the dense and tight surveillance soul tools without being detected. Passing through the border was undoubtedly the most difficult part, and everyone understood that. They continued rising through the air under Huo Yuhao's guidance with spiritual detection. Those who could participate in this operation were the best of the best in the world of Soul Masters. There weren't any who were at rank 90, every single title Doluo was at least rank 93. There were at least half who were also transcendent Doluos. Therefore, going 5,000 meters into the air didn't trouble them at all. But Huo Yuhao wasn't satisfied with just 5,000 meters. He continued bringing everyone higher into the sky after reaching 5,000 meters. Any height above 5,000 meters was practically forbidden to humans, and the further they went, the more gaps between their cultivation ranks began to show. Nothing much happened to the transcendent Doluo, but those who weren't yet transcendent Doluo gradually began to slow down. But what astonished them was that Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong, who were holding each other's hands, didn't decelerate due to the cold or because the air was thin. They seemed like their situation wasn't that much different from the various transcendent Doluo. They surprised everyone yet again, as they continued taking them up. Huo Yuhao stopped rising only when they reached over 6,000 meters in the sky, and only then did he bring everyone towards the Sun-Moon Empire's territory. Huo Yuhao was already a Class 9 Soul Engineer. He and Xian Zuan had conducted a series of research and experiments regarding all kinds of surveillance soul tools over the past 2 years, and therefore, he couldn't be more familiar with these soul tools. High-altitude aerial surveillance soul tools could only conduct surveillance downwards. Only a very small minority could survey both up and down at the same time. This type was extremely dangerous for everyone here, so that was the reason why Huo Yuhao continued to go up. All soul tools would be much less effective above 5,000 meters, and that was the same for high-altitude aerial surveillance soul tools. Even though 2 years had gone by since then, these 2 years weren't enough for surveillance soul tools to be advanced to another level. Therefore, 2 years later, according to Huo Yuhao's accurate judgment with spiritual detection, all the surveillance soul tools, whether they were on the ground or in the sky, were insufficient to reach altitudes of more than 6,000 meters. As casual as the transcendent Doluos were, they still aided the other title Doluo to rise to greater heights, at the same time, as they continued forward and flew towards the Sun-Moon Empire's territory. Admiration was starting to appear in those titled Dulu's minds. The reconnaissance and concealment abilities that Huo Yuhao had displayed was just one part of it. The other was the absolute strength that the two of them were displaying. Rank 93 titled Doluo had a lot of trouble flying at 6,000 meters, but Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong appeared extremely casual from the beginning to the end. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao was the main control-type Soul Master, and he was leading all the other titled Doluo. He was multitasking, yet he could maintain flight at such a high altitude so casually. That was sufficient to prove his and Tang Wutong's strength. Of course, these titled Doluo didn't know that Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had Class 9 flying-type soul tools behind their backs. This pair of flying-type soul tools allowed them to conserve soul power as much as possible, and allowed them to fly at extremely high altitudes. The heavenly son Doluo was already filled with astonishment. He didn't just stop underestimating Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong, but he even treated them with caution and wariness. Typically, one had to be at least a titled Doluo to fly at more than 5,000 meters. Furthermore, going another 1,000 meters above 5,000 was another challenge altogether. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong didn't need anyone's help to fly to 6,000 meters, and even if their flying-type soul tools were special, that was sufficient to display their abilities. This meant they were at least titled Doluo. How old are they? The White Tiger Duke did say that they were around 20 years old. That's just hard to imagine, and I can't see them straight anymore. Shrek Academy has managed to nurture titled Doluo, who are only a little more than 20. They have lived up to their name of being an academy of monsters. Suddenly, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong weren't the only ones who these titled Doluo were paying attention to. Even Shrek Academy's status within their minds was greatly elevated, because of the abilities that Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were displaying. Huo Yuhao wasn't aware of the psychological changes that were happening in these titled Doluo's minds, but he could guess some of them. Even though he had the body Doluo's support, and he could lead these formidable individuals, their statuses within the world of Soul Masters were too high. If he didn't show some prowess, he couldn't convince them at all. But now there seemed to be no problem at all. The truth was, they weren't the only ones who were astonished. Even Huo Yuhao himself was surprised by his spiritual power. He almost didn't leave Shrek City at all when he was cultivating hard for the past 2 years, and he barely even left the Tang sect. Tang Wutong had returned to his side, and even though that mysterious seal was affecting him, his heart and mind had been very clear and unperturbed over the past 2 years, because he was with the person he loved. He was also cultivating with the help of Haodong power, and his improvement was exponential. Huo Yuhao had always believed that he was increasing more of his soul power, but only today did he realize that his spiritual power had also grown to an incredibly powerful standard without his knowledge. His spiritual power had grown to a level that he almost found unbelievable. He didn't feel like he was expending any spiritual power at all when he was using spiritual detection, and he could only feel his consciousness stretching out like the entire world was in his grasp. That feeling was very magical, and it also contained an inexplicable profundity. Therefore, he unwittingly expanded his detection's area of effect to more than 10,000 meters. He could feel almost everything in the skies above and the ground below at a whim, and the surveillance soul tools that the Sun Moon Empire had deployed both in the air and on the ground were within his detection range. Huo Yuhao also discovered to his surprise, as he was using spiritual detection, that he could even sense those surveillance soul tools' detection range. The reason why he could sense that was because the energy waves that these surveillance soul tools were releasing, no matter what type they were conducted through energy. Thermal and oscillation detectors, as surveillance soul tools that relied on vision, had a very small range. They were what the Sun Moon Empire was researching. Now that Huo Yuhao could vividly sense all these energy waves, he could naturally and casually take everyone away from danger, circle past these soul tools' detection ranges, and directly towards the Sun Moon Empire's inner territory. They began to accelerate, and an altitude of 6,000 meters was the maximum that practically all surveillance soul tools could reach. But Huo Yuhao also realized that the Sun Moon Empire actually had a kind of ultra-long-range aerial surveillance soul tool on the ground. A soul tool like that could release a powerful energy beam that surged high into the sky, and it could reach even 10,000 meters in the air to conduct surveillance. But it also had one fatal flaw: the beam could only sweep continuously through the sky. It couldn't conduct surveillance over an entire area at the same time. Huo Yuhao understood that feature very easily. Just as he was using spiritual detection, the distance that he could reach, when he was detecting in a single direction, was vastly different from when he was detecting over an area. The Sun Moon Empire had probably developed a soul tool like that by compressing an oscillation detector's surveillance capability, and compromising on area of effect, so that it could achieve a longer range. A single surveillance soul tool like that was naturally ineffective, but if there were many, and if they crossed each other as they made their sweeps, such a setup would be effective to some extent. However, it appeared like the Sun Moon Empire didn't have many of these surveillance soul tools, so Huo Yuhao and the others didn't run into too much trouble. Faint light flickered as a dash of ice-cold light flashed across Huo Yuhao's face. His consciousness continued to stretch outward, and he almost couldn't control the desire in his heart. He wanted to see exactly how far his spiritual detection could reach. When his spiritual detection's area had reached more than 15,000 meters, he finally suppressed the impulse in his heart. The reason was because he discovered to his astonishment that he still hadn't reached his limit. How's that possible? The difference from before and now was far too large, and he was pushing his detection out in all directions. This didn't seem like something that normal growth in spiritual power could achieve. Huo Yuhao began to understand through this period of experience that his spiritual power was actually increasing at an incredible speed, because of his spiritual soul core, but he wasn't that sure about it on typical days, because his spiritual power was compressed and gathered within his soul core. Forming a soul core in one's dantian was extremely rare in the world of soul masters, and how effective that turned out to be far exceeded Huo Yuhao's expectations. But that feeling of his consciousness extending, like heaven and earth were in his grasp, evidently wasn't because of his spiritual power's skyrocketing growth. Instead, it stemmed from another kind of power. This feeling was similar to when Huo Yuhao had first met the Calamity Necromancer, Electrolux's aura. Therefore, Huo Yuhao could faintly see that this had to have something to do with his entry into the mystical god realm, and with the approval that he received from the god of emotion. His spiritual power, or perhaps his consciousness, seemed to have gone through certain qualitative changes. These qualitative changes allowed his spiritual power and spirit to reach a whole new level. If he went according to how his teacher, Electrolux, had said before, this level was called divine sense. Of course, Huo Yuhao understood that his divine sense was still incomplete, and could only be considered half of the real thing, because it came from a godly seat's approval. But even then, the benefits conferred upon him were quite conspicuous. Not even he could tell what kind of level his all-out fighting strength could reach. Huo Yuhao sensed his body's transformations, as he brought everyone successfully into the Sun Moon Empire's territory. His spiritual power's tremendous growth caused him to change his thought process. With the range and area that his spiritual detection could reach, he didn't have to worry about any surveillance soul tools at all. Naturally, they didn't have to progress on foot. Flying at high speed through the air could save a lot of time. Therefore, Huo Yuhao immediately lowered their altitude once they passed through the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance lockdown perimeter. They went down to about 3,000 meters, while their flight speed accelerated swiftly, as he brought the group of titled Doluor deep into the Sun Moon Empire. These titled Doluor were starting to become a little numb. They were feeling far too many mystical things, because Huo Yuhao was sharing his spiritual detection with them. Many titled Doluor were prepared to die to ensure that this mission was a success. However, their moods were a lot better than before at this point. With such a magical companion who was so adept at concealment and surveillance around, there was no doubt that their success rate and guarantee of safety were greatly improved. Huo Yuhao's status in every titled Doluor's mind was rising continuously. They flew for 4 hours before Huo Yuhao reduced his speed and took everyone down into a dense, thick forest. They were all titled Doluor, and their flight speeds were just too terrifying. The Mingdo mountain range was bordering the Sun Moon Empire in the first place, and once they entered the Sun Moon Empire's territory, it took them 4 hours to come close to Radiant City. Everyone drifted to the ground. Huo Yuhao stretched his spiritual detection far into the distance once more within this dense forest, and all that was happening within this forest, and within his spiritual detection's area of effect, was telling him that they were absolutely safe. Huo Yuhao stopped using imitation, and stopped sharing his spiritual detection, as he smiled and turned towards the titled Doluor. Let's rest for a while, everyone, and readjust ourselves. We're not far from Radiant City, and we'll enter in the evening. Dubuzi stared at Huo Yuhao with a strange look in his eyes. Kid, you have given me too many surprises. How did you do all that? The other title Doluor's eyes were also trained on Huo Yuhao, and strange expressions filled every single one of their eyes. There was also something in their eyes that wasn't there before: equality. Yes, in this moment, they were treating Huo Yuhao as someone who shared the same standard and prowess as they did. Huo Yuhao said, "The truth is, Wutong and my martial souls confuse. Therefore, we complement and support each other, and only then can we achieve things that normal soul masters cannot. This isn't my individual strength." He raised his hand, which was holding Tang Wutong's hand, as he spoke. A thought occurred to Dubuzi as he heard his words, and only then did he realize that he had overlooked the incredibly beautiful girl who barely spoke, who had been following beside Huo Yuhao this entire time. Martial soul fusion. That's just extraordinary. If I remember correctly, you have twin martial souls, while your spiritual type martial soul should be mainly used for control and detection. Your other martial soul possesses ultimate ice, and it's mainly used for battle. If not for the fact that the circumstances don't allow it, I would truly wish to see exactly what kind of strength you can reach. Shrek Academy will no longer have to worry about anything for the next century with you in their future. Dubuzi was full of lament as he spoke. His body sect had many prodigious soul masters, but they would obviously lose their luster when compared to Huo Yuhao. They weren't even at the same standard. Dubuzi could tell that this youth, who was just a little more than 20 years old, had completely grown up. He was now positioned among the most powerful individuals in the world of soul masters, while his greatest advantage was his age. He was just a little more than 20, and this meant he would undoubtedly become a transcendent Doluor in the future. At the same time, he had a high chance of becoming an ultimate Doluor. Not even Dubuzi could guess how terrifying an ultimate Doluor, who possessed twin martial souls and an ultimate martial soul, would be, but he understood that as long as Huo Yuhao was given some more time, Shrek Academy and Shrek City would extremely secure no matter who controlled this world in the future. No matter how soul tools developed in the future, when a person's strength reached the pinnacle of the world, he would still be the most intimidating and the best deterrent. Wasn't the beast god in the Great Star Do Forest like that? Even if the Sun Moon Empire conquered the entire continent in the future, would they dare to provoke the beast god? The beast god had already mastered the laws of space, and not even an ultimate Doluor could stop him if he truly wanted to assassinate somebody. Therefore, even a ruthless and ambitious character like Shu Qianran would never think of attacking the Great Star Do Forest. Huo Yuhao would likely become Shrek Academy's deterrence in the same regard in the future. Huo Yuhao smiled bashfully and said, "Please rest, everyone. I have just expended a lot of energy, so I'll go ahead and recover." He pulled Tang Wutong to one side and sat down as he spoke, and they placed their palms together as they meditated to recover. Of course, Huo Yuhao didn't use as much energy as he said he had. His spiritual powers' formidable strength had something to do with their martial soul fusion, but more came from his own abilities. Tang Wutong stared at Huo Yuhao, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Huo Yuhao would make all the decisions when they were outside. She didn't want to attract too much attention, and she didn't have to prove anything. The sun gradually began to set in the west, and the sky was slowly covered with beautiful reddish-gold colors, and anyone looking down from the sky over Radiant City would still have a feeling of obscurity. This wasn't Huo Yuhao's first time in Radiant City, but his impression was a little different every time. He was filled with admiration and shock in the beginning, and that was because he didn't understand much about the world of soul tools. But now, he wasn't just shocked. Instead, he felt a little fearful. The tremendous explosion in Radiant City back then was incredibly frightening, but what was the ultimate result? The ultimate result was that, within several years, Radiant City had completely recovered. Furthermore, their buildings were even higher compared to back then, and the depth that they contained was much more profound and complex. Huo Yuhao was already a Class 9 soul engineer, and he could understand a lot of things. Radiant City wasn't as simple as a normal city. It didn't have sprawling city walls, and there weren't large numbers of guards. But what Huo Yuhao saw was Radiant City's seemingly chaotic, but actually extremely practical structural setups. These structures were like fulcrums in an enormous web, and weren't as simple as just structures. They contained tremendous soul power undulations. Huo Yuhao had heard from Xian Ziwen that the Sun Moon Empire had some core secrets regarding their soul tool research, and not even Xian Ziwen, who was the #1 research fellow back then, was sure about what these secrets were. The Sun Moon Empire had another place besides their illustrious virtue hall called the Imperial Consecration Hall. It was called a Consecration Hall, but it was better named the Imperial Research Center. Almost all of the Sun Moon Empire's Class 9 Soul Engineers were members of this research center, and one was only worthy of joining this research center when one became a Class 9 Soul Engineer. That place controlled all of the Sun Moon Empire's true secrets regarding soul tools, and these secrets included a kind of soul tool known as high-energy compression array soul tools. This type of soul tool could store soul power in massive amounts, and could absorb energy from the external world to sustain itself. The only problem was that such soul tools were too bulky, and there was no way to transport them. That was the reason why they weren't directly inserted into the war, and only Radiant City had such things around. But these high-energy compression array soul tools also possessed incredibly formidable power. An array like that could store soul power equivalent to that of 100 titled Doluor combined. According to Xian Ziwen's judgment, Radiant City had a total of 4 of these exorbitantly expensive and enormous high-energy compression soul tools. What they were used for was to provide Radiant City with enough energy to sustain their overall defenses. Only individuals from the Imperial Research Center knew exactly how these soul tools looked and worked, but they had to be absolutely terrifying. Soul power equivalent to 400 titled Doluor was a force terrifying enough to construct a defensive barrier for the entire city. Xian Ziwen had also told Huo Yuhao that if the Sun Moon Empire could make these high-energy compression array soul tools smaller, then apocalypse would descend upon the continent's other empires. When that happened, the Sun Moon Empire would possess batches of soul tools similar to the Death God at their disposal, and Class 10 soul tools would appear immediately afterward. Xian Ziwen was proud and arrogant, but he told Huo Yuhao very clearly that finalizing research on something like high-energy compression array soul tools wasn't something that a single soul engineer could achieve. That was the result of the Sun Moon Empire's many Class 9 soul engineers' research over many years. A single soul engineer could only master part of the technology's components, and every one of this soul tool's important components was equivalent to a Class 9 soul tool. This gap in soul tool technology wasn't something that could be covered within 10 or 20 years, or even within 100 years. Therefore, Xian Ziwen had already privately given his pessimistic opinion about the war. The Sun Moon Empire's foundations were just too powerful, and they also had sufficient resources. What they needed now was to gradually convert their foundations in soul tool technology accumulated over the years into practical uses for war. When that happened, who could stop their forward march? That was the reason why Huo Yuhao felt fearful in this moment. That frightful sensation was too evident when he viewed Radiant City as a Class 9 soul engineer. Radiant City was like a frightening transcendent soul beast in his eyes, and it was just lying there, prostrate. Nobody knew when it would truly flash its fangs. Huo Yuhao even found the Holy Ghost Church laughable. That frightening sect that seemed to control many of the Sun Moon Empire's core existences, which also possessed formidable strength in 2 ultimate Doluor, was perhaps just a joke in front of the Sun Moon Empire's true foundations. However, the Sun Moon Empire needed them right now. If the day came when Shu Qianran believed that his wings were fully outstretched, and when the might of soul tools could be placed on full display, the Holy Ghost Church would face a calamity that would probably exceed their expectations. Huo Yuhao gradually clenched his fist as Xian Ziwen's words echoed in his mind. If you want to stop the Sun Moon Empire from launching an invasion, there's only one thing you can do. You have to create a kind of power or force large enough to intimidate the entire Sun Moon Empire, so that they won't dare to use their frightening soul tools so easily. That is the only way to give the Doluor continent's 3 native empires sufficient time. When Xian Ziwen was making that speech to Huo Yuhao, he also told him that he couldn't achieve such a feat. A Class 9 soul engineer was Xian Ziwen's limit, and only a talented prodigy like Huo Yuhao had a chance to push through to become a Class 10 soul engineer, and create a terrifyingly apocalyptic soul tool. Huo Yuhao didn't feel that deeply back then, but now he truly understood the meaning behind Xian Ziwen's words. There were many more surveillance soul tools of many different kinds inside Radiant City, and their surveillance was much tighter. There was no question that some of the newly developed surveillance soul tools would appear inside Radiant City, especially when it came to aerial surveillance soul tools. There were many domain-related surveillance soul tools that Huo Yuhao was coming across for the first time. Huo Yuhao inspected everything closely and made his judgment before he brought the title Doluo down to the ground. Entering Radiant City across the ground was, comparatively, the easiest way. The city didn't have any city walls after all, so they could enter from anywhere. Huo Yuhao made sure that the space in between everyone was a little tighter before he shared his spiritual detection. They circled around Radiant City for almost a third of its circumference, and only when the sky had completely darkened did they find a gap, which Huo Yuhao swiftly brought everyone through and into Radiant City. There were fewer surveillance soul tools once they entered Radiant City, since the majority of them were aimed outward. Huo Yuhao stopped using imitation when they reached a dark and shady corner. He turned to the title Doluo and whispered, "Luck has been on our side, seniors, and I've managed to bring everyone inside. I will now return my interim command to you, Body Doluo. What do we do next?" Huo Yuhao strongly adhered to the White Tiger Duke's reminder that his main task had been completed once he brought these titled Doluo into Radiant City. He would naturally no longer be the one directing things after that. Huo Yuhao could tell from the White Tiger Duke's words back then that this operation wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. There had to be deeper things within, but since the Duke wasn't willing to tell him what the true aim of their mission was, he couldn't probe any further. Naturally, he wouldn't involve himself too much. The Body Doluo, Dubuzi nodded and said, "Change your appearances, everyone, and split up to find a place to settle down. We have arrived earlier than we predicted, so we should get familiar with our environment. 3 individuals will form one team. Yuhao, you and Tang Wutong will form a team with me. We will use the transmission soul tools that we have prepared to communicate, and we will use codes when we talk to each other." The titled Doluo nodded one by one as they began to disguise themselves. They were evidently prepared as they swiftly changed into the Sun Moon Empire's clothing before they made some simple changes to their facial appearance. Anyone who could become a powerful titled Doluo wasn't simple, and it didn't take long before they dispersed. Dubuzi disguised himself as a middle-aged man in his 40s, and even his body became strangely different. His originally broad and towering frame became much smaller, to the point where he seemed weak and frail. The other 2 powerful individuals from the body sect had also disguised themselves as his servants, and they were extremely inconspicuous. This video will end here.